If you're currently receiving housing assistance through federal programs, particularly those focused on homelessness prevention, there's critical information you need to understand right now. Recent policy shifts at the federal level are fundamentally transforming how housing support works across the nation, and advocacy groups estimate these changes could impact approximately 170,000 households during the coming months. This represents a complete restructuring of the system that's been in place for over a decade. We're witnessing unprecedented legal challenges, funding freezes affecting billions of dollars, and a philosophical transformation in how the government approaches housing insecurity. Today, I'm going to walk you through exactly what's changing, which programs face potential disruptions, and most importantly, I'll provide you with actionable resources to help determine whether you might be affected and what steps you can take to protect yourself. I want to acknowledge upfront that this situation is stressful for many people who depend on these services. My goal is to cut through the confusion you might be encountering in news reports and social media posts and give you clear, factual information so you can prepare appropriately. These policy shifts are unfolding rapidly, creating significant uncertainty within the National Housing Assistance Network. To understand what's at stake, we need to examine how the underlying philosophy has evolved. A question for you. Before we dive deeper, I'd like to hear your perspective. What are your thoughts on different approaches to housing assistance? Should housing be provided first, with support services offered afterward, or should recipients be required to participate in treatment programs before receiving housing? Share your experiences and opinions in the comments. Your insights help build a stronger, more informed community. For roughly the past 15 years, federal housing policy has increasingly emphasized what's known as the housing first approach. This model operates on a straightforward principle: provide stable housing immediately, then connect residents with supportive services like substance abuse treatment, mental health counseling, or job training programs. Advocates of this framework argue that housing stability creates the foundation necessary for people to address other challenges in their lives. Think about it from a practical standpoint. It's extremely difficult to maintain sobriety, attend regular therapy appointments, or hold down employment when you're worried about where you'll sleep each night or whether your belongings are safe. This concept aligns with established psychological research on human needs. You can't effectively focus on personal growth and recovery when your most basic survival needs remain unmet. Stable housing removes that constant crisis mode, allowing people to direct their energy toward genuine transformation. Multiple communities have implemented long-term pilot programs testing this approach, and many have documented significant positive outcomes. People who received housing assistance without preconditions often achieved employment, maintained sobriety, and eventually transitioned to fully independent living at higher rates than anticipated. However, current federal leadership has characterized the housing first model as ineffective. In official statements released in mid-November, officials argued that providing housing without requirements creates dependency on government assistance while failing to address underlying causes of housing instability. As a result, the administration has announced a major reallocation of approximately $3.9 billion in competitive housing grants. These funds are being redirected away from permanent supportive housing programs toward transitional housing models and mandatory treatment-based programs. The numbers tell a striking story. Previously, about 88% of grant awards supported permanent housing initiatives. Under the new framework, permanent housing programs will be capped at just 30% of a community's renewal funding. The new policy also fundamentally changes how program success is measured. The emphasis has shifted toward what officials call accountability, requiring participants to demonstrate sobriety, secure employment, and show progress towards self-sufficiency before receiving or continuing assistance. In media interviews, federal officials have described the previous approach as merely warehousing people without genuine transformation. The stated goal is to reward providers not just for housing individuals, but for delivering comprehensive treatment, facilitating personal transformation, and successfully transitioning people to complete independence. Here's where the situation becomes more nuanced. Many housing first programs already incorporated exactly these elements. Successful initiatives didn't just hand people keys and walk away. They provided intensive case management, connected residents with employment services, offered mental health support, and helped people build the skills needed for long-term stability. Research from various implementation sites showed that when people received unconditional housing combined with voluntary services, many did achieve sobriety, found employment, and maintained their housing long after program participation ended. However, critics argue that outcomes have been inconsistent and that the model hasn't delivered the transformational results initially promised. Some observers contend that without requirements and accountability measures, too many participants fail to make meaningful progress. The community perspective on this is genuinely divided. Some people credit Housing First programs with literally saving their lives, providing the stability needed to rebuild from rock bottom. Others believe that mandatory treatment requirements and clear expectations are essential for creating genuine motivation to change. Both viewpoints deserve consideration. The question isn't simply which philosophy sounds better in theory, it's which approach actually helps more people achieve lasting stability and independence. Beyond the philosophical debate, there are serious procedural concerns about how these changes are being implemented. Understanding the timeline is crucial. Federal housing agencies typically release funding opportunity notices well in advance, giving communities time to apply and plan their budgets. In fact, a 2-year funding notice was published in 2024, and communities across the country developed programs and budgets expecting their grants to be renewed this January according to that existing framework. On November 13th, that notice was rescinded and replaced with an entirely new one reflecting the policy changes I've described. This happened just weeks before fiscal year 2025 funding awards were scheduled to be distributed. This is why the timing matters so critically. According to legal challenges that have been filed, the agency has indicated that no new awards will be issued until May at the earliest. This creates a multi-month gap during which programs may have no funding. The practical implications are severe. Many programs operate on grant cycles that expire at different points throughout the year. Legal documents indicate that approximately 1/3 of current Continuum of Care grants are set to expire between January and June of this coming year. Even if these programs ultimately receive renewed funding, they'll still face a period of several months with no financial support. This could force organizations to lay off staff members, reduce services significantly, close their doors entirely, discharge current residents back into homelessness. For individuals and families currently housed through these programs, this represents an existential threat. They could lose their housing through no fault of their own, simply due to administrative changes in how funding is allocated. The new application process also introduces several other stipulations that may create conflicts for some service providers. Law enforcement cooperation. Organizations may be required to coordinate with law enforcement agencies on encampment removals and tracking of individuals with criminal justice involvement. Prohibited approaches. Certain harm reduction strategies that were previously acceptable are now banned from federally funded programs. Program design restrictions. The new framework eliminates or restricts certain program models that were previously eligible for funding. For many nonprofit organizations, these requirements create an impossible dilemma. They may need to choose between compromising their organizational ethics and evidence-based practices, potentially violating local ordinances or state laws, foregoing federal funding entirely, and closing their programs. The magnitude of these concerns has triggered an unprecedented legal challenge. A coalition of housing advocacy organizations, municipalities, and service providers has filed a federal lawsuit seeking to block implementation of the new rules. The plaintiffs in this case represent a diverse cross-section of stakeholders: national housing advocacy organizations, individual nonprofit service providers, major cities from across the country county governments, regional coalitions. This broad coalition argues that the policy changes violate administrative law on multiple grounds. While I'm not an attorney and cannot provide legal analysis, the public documents outline several key arguments: arbitrary and capricious decision-making. The plaintiffs contend that the policy shift lacks sufficient justification and ignores evidence supporting the existing approach. Violation of statutory deadlines. Federal law apparently required the funding notice to be published by June 15th. The November announcement substantially missed this deadline. Administrative Procedure Act violations. The lawsuit argues the changes were implemented without following proper rulemaking procedures. Congressional intent. The legal challenge asserts that the reallocation contradicts the purposes for which Congress appropriated these funds. The core argument is straightforward. We currently have a system that, while imperfect, is keeping tens of thousands of people housed. Abruptly dismantling this system to implement an untested alternative risks catastrophic consequences. The plaintiffs are asking a federal judge to issue a preliminary injunction, essentially a court order preventing the new rules from taking effect while the legal case proceeds. This would allow the existing system to continue operating while the courts examine whether the policy changes were implemented lawfully. If you're currently receiving housing assistance, here's what you need to know. Not all programs are equally affected. The changes primarily impact specific types of housing programs, particularly those funded through Continuum of Care competitive grants. Your risk level depends on several factors. What type of program you're enrolled in, when your program's current grant expires, whether your program operates under a Housing First model, how your local community plans to respond to the new requirements, steps you can take right now. Contact your case manager or housing coordinator. Ask directly whether your program might be affected by the November policy changes. Request information about your program's current grant cycle and expiration date. Document everything. Keep records of all communications about your housing situation. Save copies of any notices you receive. Know your rights. If your program faces closure, you should receive advance notice. Ask about alternative housing options or transfer procedures. Connect with local advocacy groups. Community organizations may be organizing responses or providing support to affected residents. Stay informed. This situation is evolving rapidly. Follow trusted local news sources and advocacy organizations for updates. Questions to ask your housing provider. Be direct when seeking information. Is our program funded through a Continuum of Care grant? When does our current grant expire? Have you received any information about potential funding gaps? What contingency plans are in place if funding is delayed? Are there alternative programs I should apply to as a backup? The lawsuit is currently before a federal judge. We should expect a ruling on the preliminary injunction request within the coming weeks or months. This decision will be critical. It will determine whether the new rules take effect immediately or whether the existing system continues while litigation proceeds. Regardless of the initial ruling, this case will likely involve appeals and could take considerable time to fully resolve. This situation extends beyond immediate funding concerns. It represents a fundamental debate about how society should address housing insecurity and homelessness. Should we prioritize getting people into housing quickly, trusting that stability enables recovery, or should we require participation in treatment and demonstration of progress before providing housing? There's no simple answer, and reasonable people disagree based on their values, experiences, and interpretation of the evidence. What's clear is that abrupt, large-scale system changes carry significant risks, particularly for vulnerable people who depend on these programs for their basic survival. I'll continue monitoring this situation and providing updates as significant developments occur. The legal proceedings in particular will be critical to watch. If you want to ensure you don't miss important updates, subscribe to reputable housing advocacy organizations' newsletters. Follow local news coverage of housing issues in your community, connect with community groups working on housing policy, stay engaged with your housing provider and ask questions. Change in public policy is inevitable, and every approach to complex social issues has limitations. Housing First isn't perfect, and neither is any alternative model. What matters most is that we maintain stability for vulnerable people while working towards solutions that truly help them achieve independence. If you're currently housed through one of these programs, please don't panic, but do take this seriously. Get accurate information about your specific situation, understand your timeline, and explore your options. For those who aren't directly affected but care about these issues, consider how you can support your local community. This might mean contacting your representatives to share your perspective, Supporting local nonprofits serving homeless populations, volunteering your time or expertise, simply staying informed and voting according to your values. Remember, behind all these statistics and policy debates are real people, individuals and families trying to rebuild their lives, children who need stability, veterans dealing with trauma, people battling addiction, people and countless others facing circumstances most of us hope never to experience. Whatever your political perspective on the right approach to housing policy, I hope we can all agree that these individuals deserve dignity, support, and a genuine pathway to stability and independence. Thank you for taking the time to educate yourself on this critical issue. Stay safe, stay informed, and take care of each other.